All rise.
Thank you, everyone. You may be seated. Over the last few days, you have heard closing arguments from representatives of various faiths. You have also heard from people who believe that there is no such thing as eternity, as well as those who say we cannot possibly know what happens next. Today, we will hear from our last representative, a man of the Christian faith. And I know that this has been a long and complex process, but I would ask that you give him the same attention and consideration that you have granted our other representatives. Counsel, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. First, I want to start by thanking you for the attention that you have paid to the evidence throughout this week. I know that all of you are busy. Many of you are missing important jobs. But I would submit to you that the evidence that you have listened to this week, the deliberations that you will enter into shortly, and the decisions that you will come to as a group will end up being the most important decision of your lifetime. I appreciate that you have listened to the arguments which have been made by my brother and sister in the law in terms of the other two positions that have been presented that are held by members of the faith of Judaism, the faith of Islam, those who are agnostic, those who are atheist. And I now ask you to listen to my closing argument as I present to you our view of what we believe the evidence has shown. This case starts in Bethlehem, where this man Jesus was born. His life here on earth ends at Golgotha, the place of the cross. But the question mark that you will have to decide is what happened in that tomb and how that body got out of that tomb. Let me start by explaining what the three of us all agree on, okay? First of all, there's no question about whether Jesus was an historical figure. There are many secular historians who have spent their lives researching the time period of Jesus of Nazareth. Also, there's no question that Jesus was crucified. There were many, many witnesses to the crucifixion, including not the least of which a Roman centurion and a Roman guard. And third, that from the time that he left the cross and was put into the tomb, that just 2 days after he left the cross was empty. The body was not there. How did that happen? Well, you have heard the three options. Option number one is that Jesus got out of that tomb on his own, which would mean he didn't die on the cross. He may have been suffering, but he somehow recovered inside the tomb and somehow got out on his own. Second is that somebody, friend or foe, stole the body, dead or alive. And option number three is that, as Jesus predicted, he was resurrected from death. From that witness stand, you have heard historical experts who are secular, who simply told you about the time. We've heard from medical experts. We've heard from eyewitnesses to the passion and the crucifixion that occurred. And we have heard from the written testimony from back at that time from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, what are commonly referred to as the four Gospels, who wrote both what they saw as well as what they collected in terms of testimony from others. But in this courtroom, you were to take that testimony from that stand that was given to you from those four Gospels as sworn depositions of those individuals. Because indeed, it is testimony that those four men protected and shared with the world. Now, let's talk about the historical evidence. Matthew testified about the tomb. He explained, first of all, that there was a rock that was placed in front of the entrance to the tomb. Second, he explained that the tomb was sealed. And third, Matthew explained that a guard was set in front of the tomb. Now, why would the Romans go to such trouble in guarding a dead body? Well, first, it was a precaution against the very thing that the Jewish authorities were concerned about, and that is that body being stolen, because they wanted to protect against any talk of a resurrection. You can go to Israel today and see tombs just like the one that Jesus was put in. You've essentially got a cave that is dug out, and then there'll be an opening, and then there's going to be a closure of the opening by a stone. What we know about Jesus' tomb is this. Mark wrote, as you heard from the witness stand, in a 4th century manuscript, that the stone that was placed in front of Jesus' tomb was so large that even 20 men could not move it once it was set in place. Is it possible, like my opponents say, that in the middle of the night, that the followers of Jesus came, maybe with some special tools or something like that, and were able to get that big stone moved? Yeah, it's possible. Is it likely? No. If you remember, A.T. Robinson, the New Testament scholar, explained that the sealing of a tomb was done by a cord that would be stretched across the tomb, and then both ends of the cord would be stamped with the imperial seal. Now, why do that? What's that all about? Well, that seal was of the Romans, the people who occupied Israel at that time. You break that cord, you break that seal, and the full power of Roman law and authority comes down on you. Let's also remember this. Jesus, at that time, was the most notorious criminal in all of Jerusalem. The Romans and the Jewish leaders didn't want to take any chances that the Roman guard was at the tomb around the clock at all hours. And remember the testimony of Professor Daniel Whedon, who's a professor of ancient languages at Wesleyan University, who explained that a guard is not one person, but instead 16 soldiers. We know that Roman guards took their jobs seriously. And why is that? Because of the punishment that was inflicted on you in the event that you did not do so. If you abdicated your duties, if you fell asleep on the job, if you walked away from being on watch, your punishment was death. They literally threw you off a cliff, and all the guards knew that. So you can rest assured that that guard stayed vigilant throughout the time that they were there. And remember something about this guard. On the very day they took their post, members of that same group of soldiers flogged Jesus within an inch of his life. And what does that mean? It means taking leather straps that are loaded down with rocks and have glass put in them and sharpened bones, and taking them to the man's front and his back and whipping him 39 times, tearing the flesh off of his body. And then they took that man and they had him carry his own cross, and they nailed him with railroad spikes to a cross. And then they sat there, and within their centurion who was in charge, they watched for 6 hours while the man died, while he slowly suffocated from his own body weight. Now, the position of the Roman guards and their feelings about Jesus of Nazareth is crystal clear. Their allegiance was to Rome, and that's where it stayed. Well, think about this hypothetical. Let's take what we said before and just add to it, which is maybe in the middle of the night, you got the 11 apostles or however many followers were needed, and they come in with specialized tools, and they come in with a counterfeit stamp, and they pry the thing open, get Jesus' body out, put the cord back over it, and use the counterfeit stamp and seal it up again, and everything's good. Okay? Is that possible? Yeah, it's possible. But in your life experience, in common sense, does that make any sense to you whatsoever? No. It's doubtful. Now, opposing counsel would have you believe that Jesus was just an historical figure. Apparently charismatic because he had a following, but just some guy from the sticks. And that this whole thing about the resurrection is a hoax, clever, make-believe, a performance. And they would have you look at Jesus as being a well-spoken, controversial, radical, troublemaker. But let's remember the teaching of Occam's razor, which is the theory that oftentimes the simplest explanation is the correct one. Well, you know, there are some people who believe that Jesus did not die on the cross, that he was merely tortured. Fell unconscious, body put into the tomb, gets out of the tomb on his own. But it comes back to, did he die on the cross? What do we know? There were two things that are important to know other than that Romans know how to kill. And that is, at the end of the 6 hours, as was explained from the gospel, a Roman guard took a spear and thrust it into the side of Jesus, and both blood and a clear fluid, water, came out. Well, we know from medical science today that from the blood loss that Jesus had, that he would have developed probably either or both pleural effusion, which is water on the lungs, or pericardial effusion, which is water surrounding the heart. And if there was enough water in Jesus' chest so that when it was pierced with a spear into the heart or into the lung, so that water came out so that the Romans can see it, you know one thing. You know that that man is in a state of hypovolemic shock. And most of us in this courtroom would have a difficult time surviving under those circumstances, even with today's modern medicine. But we also know that there's another test here. Is it because it was Passover, you couldn't continue with a crucifixion once it became dark, okay? Because it would violate Jewish law, and this was the Passover. So these people had to be dead. So they broke the legs, the Roman guards broke the legs of the other two men who were on either side of Jesus who were being crucified. Now, why do that? Well, it means you can't push up anymore. So you're like this, and you suffocate from your own body weight. But they didn't do that to Jesus. They didn't break his legs. Well, why is that? They certainly didn't have any problem torturing him. It's not like they felt for the guy. It's because they knew he was already dead. Again, John, the eyewitness, knew he was dead. Ladies and gentlemen, Jesus died on that cross. The idea that he didn't is foolishness. Now, you might wonder how the idea of Occam's razor explains what is truly a miracle. I mean, a resurrection is a miracle. In this instance, there was no question that Jesus had already performed miracles. He turned the water into wine at the wedding in Cana was his first miracle. He went through systematically healing people who were either blind or had leprosy or had other diseases or problems since birth. He had fed 5,000 people with a few loaves and a few fish, and that was reported by every one of the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all four of them. Christ himself had even raised other people from the dead. The testimony was that he had done so on 3 occasions, one of them being Lazarus, his friend, who had been in the tomb for 4 days. But you know, even the Jewish leaders at the time, they didn't challenge whether the miracles occurred. They couldn't. There were too many witnesses to them. No, instead, they challenged him to his face on more than one occasion, asking, by whose authority are you performing these miracles? That's what they wanted to know. So the idea of there being a miracle, that's not really in dispute. These were not shows. Now, there are differences in testimony. A lot of people point that out. They say that, well, you know, when we listen to these guys explain what happened at the tomb, all their stories are a little bit different. That, ladies and gentlemen, is common in trials. You can have one of the most straightforward cases, a bank robbery, okay? And you can have several witnesses, tellers and customers and whoever else is in the bank, and there's going to be differences in their testimony about what the robber looked like, how tall the robber was, what the chronology of events were, what the gun looked like, what the robber said. In fact, what you find is that if everybody says the exact same thing, that testimony is not credible, because that just tells you that everybody has gotten together. It's the most normal thing for people to do and, quote unquote, gotten their stories straight. They're singing the company song. That is not credible testimony. So how do you figure out what to do when you've got circumstances where you've got differences in the testimony? Is you look to see what is important about what occurred. Well, let's look to see what happened in this case. All 4 of the gospel writers say that Mary from Magdala, known as Mary Magdalene, went to the tomb. All of the writers explain that that tomb was open and that it was empty. There are many other similarities that you heard the testimony about. But 3 of the Gospels told us that there was a man on the inside wearing white, possibly an angel, who said that Jesus is not here. He is risen. You have a lot of other similarities in the testimony, but the most important is that after that tomb is empty, Jesus himself appeared to dozens of people, including all 11 of the remaining apostles. And that he picked up, to some extent, right where he left off. That is, he went up to Galilee, where he picked his apostles from. And he ate with them. And he walked with them, unafraid, out in the open. He even offered his wounds of his hands and his side for others to see, including most notably the apostle whom I share a first name with, that being Thomas. You know him probably as the doubting Thomas, who did not believe that Jesus had arisen, even though his other apostles said that he had, that he would not believe until he put his hands into Jesus' wounds. So what did Jesus do? He appeared to Thomas. And he said, go ahead, put your hands into my wounds. And Thomas, upon seeing this, he sees this man he's traveled with for 3 years who now is alive and in front of him. And he recognizes what happens, and he drops to his knees and he looks right up in the face of the man he knows his friend to be Jesus, and he says, my Lord, my God. Why? Because he knew right then and there that Jesus was the Christ. He was the Messiah. He was the Son of the living God. Well, the feat of what happened was so staggering, was so convincing, was so important that these men left everything they had and their homes and went to all 4 corners of the known world and went ahead and preached the gospel of Jesus Christ. And think of what kind of men these were, okay? These weren't some kind of nuts, okay? They were fishermen for the most part, okay? Working class, they lived comfortably enough. They were relatively safe. They were up in Galilee. They weren't down in Jerusalem where all the Romans were. They left the safety of their homes and their occupations. And these guys traveled through the wilderness, the completely unknown parts of the world, preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, that he was the Son of God, preaching the resurrection, preaching eternal life. And where did they go? Think about it. North Africa, Greece, India, modern-day Russia, all to preach the gospel. Now, they committed the rest of their lives to this, and they ended up giving the rest of their lives to this. These men who preached about Jesus did so at a cost, and they knew what the cost was. The very first one who died was Stephen. He was stoned to death. Thomas was killed with a spear. Bartholomew was flayed alive with a knife and then was crucified. And this happened to one after another, after another, after another. And these reports of the death of the apostles, they don't come from the New Testament. They come from secular historians, okay? You can believe it. You don't have to believe in the New Testament to believe the way that these men died. I'll tell you one thing, is that those guys were not about to do that if they thought that Jesus had pulled a fast one on them. No. They believed in a simple truth, that the resurrection had occurred, just as Jesus said it would. The apostles understood the resurrection to be a simple fact and a true miracle, and I think you may believe that as well. Now, the judge is going to instruct you on how to consider the evidence. You have 2 kinds of evidence. You have direct evidence, okay, where someone sees it through, sees, hears, smells, whatever, through their senses. They're personal witnesses to something, an eyewitness being the easiest example. There's also circumstantial evidence. Well, what's that? Well, say that, it's the evening, it's wintertime, and you go to sleep and there's no snow on the ground. Next morning you wake up and there's an inch of snow on the ground. You conclude, based upon that, based on your deduction, that, well, it must have snowed last night. That's circumstantial evidence. Now, the judge is going to explain to you that the law makes no distinction between direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. You're going to be instructed that you are to make deductions and reach conclusions which reason and common sense would lead you to make, and that you should not be concerned whether that's based on the evidence being direct or circumstantial. Is it realistic that Jesus did not die on that cross and recovered in the tomb and walked out on his own? Is it realistic that his followers got through the guard and the cord that sealed it and the stone in order to steal his body? Or is it realistic that Jesus did for himself what he had done for others, and that is the resurrection? And that's how the body got out of that tomb. In some instances, people use an erroneous standard to try and judge these kinds of things. They say, well, you know, I'm not 100% convinced. Well, in the law, in this courtroom, there is no such standard. Because in matters of human affairs, there's rarely a situation where any of us would be 100% convinced. What we use in courts of law like this is a standard of reasonable doubt and belief beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, what is a reasonable doubt? It's that level of doubt that would cause you to hesitate in the most important of your affairs. Our entire United States justice system on the criminal side is based upon that concept of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but not based upon 100%, because there's always some level of doubt in anything. I would submit to you that is the standard that you should use. And it's a high standard, that you look at the three options, the only possible three options, and decide which one meets that standard. Because if the resurrection occurred, it means that Jesus indeed was the Son of God, and that he defeated death, and that what John said was true, which is that God so loved the world that he gave to us his Son, his only Son, so that all who would believe in him would not perish, but would have everlasting life. Which means if you believe that the resurrection occurred, that you will have everlasting life. So when you're deliberating, and when you're thinking about the evidence in this case and the importance of this decision, it's not just this case that you're deciding. No, ladies and gentlemen, it is your own life that you are deciding. It is your future that you are deciding, both your life here and your life eternal. The judge is going to explain to you that when you go into that jury room, there will be a verdict form for you to fill out at the end of your deliberations. And I'm going to read to you exactly what that form says. You are going to select one choice. It says as follows, quote, I believe that to get Jesus' body out of the tomb, 1, his body was stolen. Or 2, he did not die on the cross, but instead he passed out and fell unconscious, and while in the tomb, he revived and got out on his own. Or 3, Jesus was resurrected. Those are the only 3 possibilities. You are to sign your name and date the date of your verdict. And as you deliberate, the question that you really have to ask yourself is this: who moved that stone? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention during my closing argument, during my explanation of what we, the Christian Church, believe occurred in that tomb. I ask you as you go for your deliberations that you listen to one another. Use your mind, use your heart, use your soul, use your conscience, and you consider everything that you've heard during this past week, and you render a verdict which is fair and speaks the truth. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Counselor. Jury, you have now heard the full arguments from members of each faith presented here. After I dismiss you, please go directly to the deliberation room and elect a foreperson. All the evidence will be with you in the jury room. You may ask any question or review any evidence necessary, but you must reach a verdict. You are now released to begin deliberation. I understand you've reached a conclusion. Foreperson, what is your verdict?
Your Honor, we, the jury, believe